Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Parenting Lab. It is the week before Thanksgiving, and let's be honest, the holidays are beautiful, but they are also a lot. Every year, I watch parents hit the holidays with this mix of hope and exhaustion, pressure, and sometimes even a little tiny bit of dread. And if that's you, you are not the only one. I want to be the voice of reason here and tell you that if you're feeling any of those emotions, you're not ungrateful, you're not dramatic. The holidays are simply the time of year when everything gets louder. The expectations, the obligations, the family patterns, the invisible workload, all of it. In fact, I like to say the holidays don't magically create peace or joy or goodwill. They magnify what is already there. So today kicks off a two-part series called How to Holiday. Part one, what we're doing today, is all about boundaries and expectations with your partners, with your kids, with extended family, and with yourself. And then in part two, we'll shift into something softer and more intentional. And that's the holiday rituals and traditions and how to create the season you actually want instead of the one you inherited or feel pressured into. Now, one thing to remember here is that boundaries aren't the point of the holidays. They're the container for it. They create the breathing room that you need so that in part two, we can talk about all that good stuff. The joy, the connection, the intention, all of that becomes so much easier when you've already protected the space for it. So, when I talk about boundaries and expectations, I'm not talking about building walls or being rigid. I'm talking about protection of your energy, your relationships, your kids' nervous systems, and the meaning you actually want this season to hold. Because without boundaries, the holidays tend to become something we perform, but with them, they can become something we actually experience. They're what shift the holidays from how are we going to get through this to how do we want to feel? What do we want to remember? And this is important. What usually overwhelms us isn't the season itself. It's walking into the season without a plan, without clarity, without conversations that should have happened weeks earlier. By the time we're packing up the car or walking into a gathering, it's already too late to figure out what our capacity is or what we're okay with or how we want things to go. But we can't get there without this first step. So today is about reclaiming the foundation, giving yourself permission to decide what this season will look like for your family. All right, so let's get into it. Let's start with something really simple, but really honest. The holidays ask more of us than almost any other time of year. More emotional energy, more planning, more money, more availability, more patience, more flexibility, more everything. And most of us are walking into the season already stretched thin. So, of course, this time of year becomes a boundary minefield. Not because you're bad at planning or because your family is uniquely complicated, but because December puts pressure on every weak spot in the system. Family of origin patterns get louder, old expectations resurface, invisible labor spikes, and then there's your kids. Their routines dissolve, their sleep gets disrupted, they're overstimulated by sugar and cousins and excitement and travel, and all of that lands in your lap. So now you're not just managing your family's expectations, you're managing your children's nervous systems, all while trying to keep everyone else comfortable. For a lot of parents, the holidays come with this unspoken job description. Be joyful, be flexible, be accommodating, be everything. Do everything. No wonder boundaries feel so hard. No wonder we feel torn between what we want, what our kids need, and what everyone else expects. No wonder resentment shows up quietly in the background, even when we genuinely love the people we're spending time with. The truth is, the holidays don't create conflict, they reveal it. They reveal the imbalances, the unspoken rules, the places where you've outgrown old dynamics, and the parts of you that need more support. And that's why we have to talk about boundaries before we talk about anything else. You can't step into the season with intention, the kind we'll talk about next week in part two, if you're already bracing yourself for emotional overload. So the first thing that needs to happen before you can set any boundary is that you have to know your capacity. Most holiday stress comes from making commitments we don't actually have the bandwidth to follow through on, or agreeing to things we never paused long enough to question, or assuming that we always do it this way is the same thing as we have to do it this way. Capacity is the antidote to all of that. Capacity asks questions like, how much emotional bandwidth do I truly have this year? What do I want my kids to remember about the holidays in our home? What feels nourishing? What feels draining? What traditions matter to us? And which ones are we keeping out of obligation? Where do I feel myself starting to tense up when I look at our calendar? Parents rarely give themselves permission to even ask these questions. We're just handed a script, a full month of nonstop activity and travel and gatherings, and we're told, make it magical. But magic doesn't come from exhaustion, it comes from intention. And intention requires a pause. Most of us don't admit that every year has a different emotional cost. Maybe finances are tight. Maybe your kids are in a tough developmental stage. Maybe your partnership has been stretched thin. Maybe you're grieving. Maybe you're just tired. Your capacity this holiday season might not match last year or the year before that, and that's not failure, that's self-awareness. And once you know your capacity, boundaries become less about saying no and more about protecting what actually matters. Now, one of the biggest sources of holiday stress isn't extended family. It actually comes from inside the partnership. And not because your partner is trying to make things harder, but because most couples walk into the season carrying two completely different sets of expectations that no one has said out loud. You grew up doing it one way, they grew up doing it another way, and both of you assume that your way is just how it's done. So the first place boundaries need to happen is right here between the two of you. Because if you're not aligned as a team, everything else gets 10 times harder. Now, here's why this matters so much. When partners don't talk early, December turns into a silent performance. One person is carrying the invisible labor, one person is trying to keep the peace with extended family, one person is overstretched and resentful, and both people feel like the other one doesn't get it. But none of that is actually about the holidays. It's about communication. Boundaries with your partner are really just clarity. Clarity about capacity, clarity about what matters, clarity about who's doing what, clarity about how you want this to feel for your family. Every partnership has unspoken rules. We always go to my parents on Christmas Eve. We host. We don't host. But these assumptions are often leftovers from our childhood, not actual choices that you've made together. So you each need to answer, what actually matters to me this year? And here's the part most couples skip. Why does this matter to you? Because when you understand the meaning behind the preference, compromise becomes so much easier. It's not, I want to go to my mom's house because that's just what we do. That's the one day of the year that I feel connected to all of my siblings, or it's the only tradition that reminds me of my dad. Meaning softens defensiveness. Another part of this dynamic in partnerships is that the holidays are basically the Olympics of invisible labor. Gifts, packing, travel, meals, school events, matching pajamas, cards, planning, coordinating, tracking who likes what, remembering who you already bought for. Most families don't officially divide this. It just defaults onto whoever has historically handled it. So here's a boundary that might change everything. Name the tasks and then divide them intentionally. Not helping, not pitching in, actual ownership. So this sounds like, I can organize the travel plans, but I need you to manage the schedule with your parents. Okay? Clarity prevents resentment. Now, this is the part most people forget. Extended family can be stressful, even when you love them. So your partnership needs a game plan for how long you're staying, how you'll divide childcare, what you'll do if someone's overwhelmed, what support looks like if it gets tense, and even a simple signal or phrase that means, hey, I need a break. One of my favorite simple scripts for this is, let's decide together how we want to show up and how we'll support each other if things get complicated. Just that one simple phrase changes the whole energy. When partners talk through all of this early, clearly, honestly, without panic or the pressure of a looming event, the season feels completely different. There's less resentment, more connection, and the boundaries you set with everyone else actually hold because that foundation is solid. So before we move on to kids, I just want to acknowledge something important. Not everyone has a partner to share the load. Some of you are navigating the holidays solo, and that brings its own challenges. So if that's you, let me say this very clearly. You're not failing. The way you're doing it isn't wrong. You're doing the best you can, and that counts. The principles we've been talking about still apply, but the strategies might look different when you don't have a co-parent to lean on. So here's a few tips for you. Prioritize ruthlessly. You cannot do it all. Pick the events and the tasks and the traditions that truly matter and let the rest go. Second, ask for support where you can. A friend, a neighbor, a relative, even if it's just one errand or 1 hour of childcare, it matters. Next, set solo-friendly boundaries. It might sound like, I'm happy to come for an hour, but I can't host this year. Or we'll celebrate our family traditions at home and skip the big gathering. Okay. Next, you need to plan recovery time. When you're doing this alone, the emotional and physical load is heavier. Built in breaks, naps, quiet moments, even just a few minutes can increase your capacity. And last, give yourself grace. Solo parenting during the holidays is extraordinary work. And here's the thing, boundaries aren't just about surviving, they're about creating a season that actually works for your family, even if it's just you and your kids. Now, let's talk about boundaries with people who feel the holidays the most intensely, our kids. Because while adults get overwhelmed by schedules and obligations, kids get overwhelmed by sensory overload, disrupted routines, too much sugar, too many people, too many transitions, and too little downtime. And yet, this is the season when we ask the most of them. We expect them to be flexible, smile for pictures, be gracious about gifts, sit at long meals, sleep in unfamiliar places, tolerate lots of adults, share new toys, handle overstimulation, and keep it together through travel, late nights, and thrown off routines. It's a lot. It's too much, honestly. And that's why boundaries with kids matter so much during the holidays. Not as punishment, not as control, but as protection. Protection of their nervous systems, their sense of safety, their ability to regulate, and their overall holiday experience. A good place to start is with predictability. Kids can handle a lot when they know what to expect. Before any holiday event, try giving them a simple roadmap: where you're going, who will be there, how long you'll be there, what the plan is for food and gifts or bedtime, and anything they're allowed or not allowed to do at the event. Predictability reduces anxiety. It also reduces meltdowns. Not because your kids are behaving better, but because their nervous systems aren't being surprised every 5 minutes. Next, you need to respect their bodies and their boundaries. Holiday culture often pushes kids into situations that may feel uncomfortable. Forced hugs, sitting with Santa, photos on command. You're allowed to opt out of all of that. Your child's body and comfort matter more than anyone else's expectations. When you protect their boundaries, you teach them how to protect their own. It's also a good idea to plan for regulation breaks. Kids need breaks, maybe every 20 minutes, maybe every hour. Each kid is different. For younger kids, a quiet room or fitting in an afternoon nap. For older kids, this might be space away from younger cousins or time to just scroll on their phone. These breaks aren't behavior management, really, they're nervous system care. A helpful reframe here is, my child isn't giving me a hard time, they're having a hard time, and boundaries help them recover from those hard times faster. And finally, be the anchor, not the enforcer. When kids get overstimulated, they need regulation, not correction. You're not failing if your kid melts down during the holidays. You're not failing if you need to leave early. You're responding to your actual child. That's just good parenting. All right. Now let's talk about the big one. Because if there's any area where parents feel the pressure the most, it's here: extended family. It's where nostalgia and obligation, tradition, guilt, and old roles all collide. And it happens fast. Holidays with extended family really are more complicated. Not because your family is uniquely dysfunctional, although some families do bring their own special flair, but because the holidays activate every old pattern you've ever outgrown. Suddenly, you're not the adult running your own home. You're the child, the peacemaker, the helper, the responsible one. And none of that works anymore when you have your own children's needs, your own capacity, and your own life to protect. Extended family is where most boundaries get tested. And honestly, it's not because people are malicious, but because your boundary is disrupting a system that's been running the same way for maybe decades. So when you say, we're not traveling this year, or we're leaving early, or we just need a quiet morning at home, you're not just setting a boundary. You're changing the choreography of a dance your family has memorized and internalized and performed for generations. And change is uncomfortable for everyone, even when it's healthy. So let's talk about a couple of the most common pressure points. First, the pressure to attend every gathering. Every family has the person, the organizer, the host, the emotional glue, who wants everyone together because that's how they feel connected. And saying no to that person can feel like betrayal. But here's the truth: you can love your family deeply and still not attend everything. You can choose connection over exhaustion. You can choose presence with the family you created over pleasing the family that you came from. A second one that comes up is the guilt tripping. You know how this goes. Oh, but we never see you, or we always do it this way, or you're the only one who won't be there. Here's what I want you to hear in this situation. Guilt is not a reason to override your capacity. A grounded response here would sound like, I understand this is disappointing, but we've made this choice and it's what works best for our family. You can acknowledge emotion without changing your boundary. It's also important to recognize that sometimes families can be chaotic and emotional. Some families have predictable conflict. Some have passive aggressive dynamics. Some have political or philosophical conversations that escalate. I have a friend that jokes that it's not a party with her family until the police are called. You're allowed to protect your children and yourself from all of that. If that's the case in your family, you can set boundaries that might sound like, we're coming, but if the conversation gets too heated, we'll be heading home early. That's not dramatic, that's leadership. Whatever the situation is in your family, it's important to set your expectations before the holiday, not during it. This is where most parents get stuck. They wait until the moment something goes wrong to set a boundary, but boundaries work better when the communication comes before the event. You can decide what your limits are before you accept the invitation. You can choose to tell your family what they can expect from you. It doesn't have to be complicated. Even a short text or a conversation will do. This prevents confusion and surprise, defensiveness, and those awkward moments where you're trying to advocate for your child in front of a crowd. And finally, you have to hold the boundary when it gets tested, because it will get tested. Not because people don't respect you, but because they're used to the old pattern. Think of boundary holding like teaching a new dance. They step the old way, you gently redirect, they test again, you hold steady, and eventually the new choreography becomes normal. Now, the catch to all of this is that setting boundaries almost always comes with guilt and pushback. You'll feel it in your body, maybe a tightening in your chest, a sinking stomach, a whisper that maybe you're being selfish or this is too hard, and it'll show up in the reaction of others. This is normal. It doesn't mean you're wrong. It doesn't mean your boundaries are unreasonable, and it doesn't mean your family doesn't love you. It just means that you're doing something new, something that challenges old patterns, expectations, and roles. So when your parent or your partner or extended family says, you've changed or I don't like this, it's not necessarily a condemnation. It's really a signal. They're noticing the difference. You're no longer bending to the old scripts. You're choosing intention over obligation. Guilt is uncomfortable because you're breaking invisible contracts that existed before you even realized them. And discomfort is exactly what signals growth. So here's how to hold your boundary under pressure. First, name the boundary internally. That means you have to know it and believe it. Remind yourself, this is what works for my family. This is what we need. Second, you need to keep your explanation simple. You don't need a long justification for your choices. Just one sentence works. We're leaving at 7. If they persist, follow up with, because that's what works for us. Third, you need to acknowledge the feelings without changing the boundary. You can say, I understand this is disappointing, or I see that this isn't what you expected. And fourth, you need to repeat it over and over if needed. People may test or push, and it's okay to calmly repeat your boundary without argument. Consistency equals safety for your nervous system. Boundaries and their pushback often feel heavier than they are. Your role is to protect your family's energy and your own peace, not to fix everyone else's feelings. So by now you're probably feeling something like, wow, this is a lot. But hopefully you're also feeling like this is something that you can do. And that's exactly the point. Because like I said at the beginning of this episode, boundaries aren't the finish line. They're the container. They're the frame that allows you to actually create the holidays that you want instead of just surviving them. So take a moment and ask yourself, how do I want to feel this holiday season? What memories do I want my kids to carry into the new year? What energy do I want in our home? Your answers don't need to be huge or elaborate. Sometimes the most meaningful holidays are the simplest. For me, that's cooking and eating together, going on walks in the snow, matching jammies and movies with hot chocolate. Your vision will look different than mine, and your vision matters, even if it looks different from last year or from what your extended family expects. And here's the connection. Boundaries protect your time, your energy, and your relationships. Your holiday vision gives those boundaries purpose and intention. When the boundaries are clear, you're free to say, yes, we will do this because it aligns with our values, or no, we'll be skipping that because it doesn't serve our family. Suddenly, the season isn't just something you endure. It becomes something that you create. All right, friends, that's a wrap for part 1 of How to Holiday. We've covered a lot. Understanding your capacity, setting boundaries with your partner, your kids, your family, managing guilt and pushback, and starting to get clear on what kind of holiday you actually want. If you take just one thing from today, let it be this. Boundaries aren't selfish. They're the foundation for connection and joy and meaning. So give yourself credit for even thinking about these things. Most parents rush straight into December and only realize halfway through that they're overwhelmed or resentful or burned out. You're getting ahead of it, and that's huge. In our next episode, we're going to get into the fun, magical part: how to create rituals and traditions that reflect your values, how to make the holidays intentional instead of chaotic, and how to build meaning and connection that your kids are going to remember their whole lives. So consider part one your holiday blueprint, and part two is where we're going to fill it in with heart and meaning and a little bit of holiday magic. Remember, this season doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be yours. So start small, protect your energy, honor your family, and be gentle with yourself. Thanks so much for listening. I can't wait to continue this series with you next week in part two. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving for my listeners here in the US, and I will see you again next week as we continue to explore the art and science of parenting and put your parenting to the test. Take care, everyone.